Defense attorney Kevin Reddington has won several high-profile cases during his lengthy career. I want to talk about one of those. This case is fully resolved. It dates back to 1989 in Massachusetts, and winning this case was an achievement that helped earn Kevin Reddington a place in the American College of Trial Lawyers. This trial is also the first successful use of what is called battered woman syndrome as a defense in Massachusetts history. The woman facing charges in this case was 33-year-old Therese Rogers. She was accused of murdering her boyfriend, a man called Walter Quinn, whom she lived with. And what Reddington argued in court was why it happened and what state of mind Therese Rogers was in when she did it. Therese Rogers was a 33-year-old woman from Bridgewater, Massachusetts. She had been in a relationship with a man called Walter E. Quinn Jr., a relationship that prosecutors and defense attorneys agreed was defined by years of severe physical and psychological torment directed at both Therese Rogers and her 9-year-old daughter. And there is limited information on this case because it did happen so long ago, but by certain wording of reports, I'm inclined to think that the daughter was Therese's from a previous relationship. But like I mentioned, Therese, her daughter, and Walter all lived together in a house that was around 25 miles south from Boston. And what the trial would eventually establish was that the dynamic and the environment inside of the house was a horrible one. Walter was a deeply violent man who hurt those closest to him. For years at the time of this case, there had been instances time and time again of Walter treating both Therese and her daughter horribly. He was angry, aggressive, destructive, and all of that he directed towards the only other two people who lived in the house with him. It started off slowly, but it got worse and worse over time until it got to the point in which every single day Therese felt like she had to walk on eggshells because the smallest thing would set him off, and when he got mad or annoyed or frustrated, there was no telling what he would do. And like most women who find themselves unfortunately in situations like that, Therese felt trapped and absolutely helpless. What Walter represented in that home to Therese and to her daughter felt like a constant escalating threat. And what Kevin Reddington would later argue in trial is that experiencing that level of mistreatment had done something very specific to Therese's psychology. By the way, Kevin Reddington was in his 30s at the time of this case. He's 75 years old now, so a long time ago. He argued that it had given Therese post-traumatic stress disorder, so PTSD, that it had rewired her threat response and put her into a state that psychologists called hypervigilance, a constant, exhausting readiness for the next attack. And Reddington would state that on the night of the killing, that hypervigilance had collided with something that Walter did or said that triggered in Therese a response that she genuinely believed was the only thing standing between her family and death. And again, the details of what exactly happened are very hard to find because remember, this was in 1988, so the internet didn't exist back then as a public resource. But what we do know is that on the night of the crime, Therese hit a breaking point. Walter was asleep when Therese grabbed a sharp weapon. She walked into the bedroom, approached Walter while he was sleeping, and using that, she plunged it directly into his eyes. His injuries were fatal. He did not make it, and Therese was then charged with first-degree murder. She didn't deny doing it. That was never the question. The only question was why. And the answer to that question was going to require the jury to understand something about the human mind under sustained threat that most of them had never been asked to consider before. Therese Rogers was arrested, charged, and facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. She retained Kevin Reddington as her attorney, and Reddington began building a defense that had never been successfully argued in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The challenge was exactly that. It was a challenge, and it was a complicated one. Not because the facts of the case were unclear, but because Reddington was asking the jury to expand their understanding of what it means to act in self-defense and to consider the possibility that self-defense does not require the threat to be immediate and visible at the moment of the act. Also want to make it very clear, I'm not saying that what Therese did was excusable or justifiable or the right thing to do at all. Murder is murder, and it is fundamentally wrong. I just think that Reddington's use of this defense is so interesting to learn about. But anyway, the defense strategy that he used is what has been defined as battered woman syndrome. That, back in 1989, was something that a lot of jurors in that courtroom were hearing for the first time. Battered woman syndrome was first described and named by Dr. Lenore Walker in her 1979 book, The Battered Woman. Dr. Walker identified a specific psychological pattern in women who had experienced intimate partner violence. A pattern that explains both why women stay in toxic relationships and how the sustained trauma of what they go through affects their perception of threat and danger. The core of the syndrome rests on what Dr. Walker describes to be the cycle of violence, a repeating pattern of tension building up, an acute violent episode, making up and apologizing, and then a calm period of time before the tension begins building again, and then the cycle repeats. She explains that over time, the repeated exposure of this cycle produces in the victim a state of learned helplessness restlessness, a psychological condition in which the person becomes convinced that they cannot escape and they cannot predict the next time that an attack will come, creating this state of constant hypervigilance. That hypervigilance is key in what Reddington was arguing in Therese's case, because the argument there is that a person in this constant state of hypervigilance, conditioned by years of real sustained violence, does not process threat in the way that an untraumatized person would. In simpler terms, a person with trauma may perceive danger completely different than a person without trauma. A person with trauma may respond to a threat that is real to them in ways that would not make sense to someone who has not been in their position. And Dr. Walker stated that a victim experiencing battered woman syndrome may genuinely believe in the moment of their response to an attack that what they are doing is the only thing that will keep them alive. Kevin Reddington had graduated from Suffolk, I think that's how you pronounce it. I just looked up how to pronounce it and it's a difficult word for me. Suffolk University Law School in 1975. He passed the bar exam and was admitted to legal practice that same year. By 1989, he had been practicing criminal defense for 14 years, taking a lot of cases that most attorneys would avoid, building a reputation as someone who was not afraid of difficult facts or difficult clients. He is known to be extremely well at his job because he is, but apart from that, he's also a very strong presence. He's theatrical, he's intellectual. He's been described as affable, tough, hardworking, and dedicated to his clients. So, the trial of Therese Rogers started the year after the crime took place. And the prosecution's argument was what you would expect, that Therese murdered Walter Quinn on purpose with intent and with premeditation. They argued that when this happened, Walter was asleep, so he wasn't actively attacking anyone when she acted, saying that there was no immediate visible threat. They stated that Therese Rogers had made a deliberate, calculated decision to kill a man who was asleep and defenseless, that whatever her history was with Walter, she had options. She could have left, she could have called the police, she could have found another way. Reddington's argument, on the other hand, was that Therese Rogers was not a murderer, but a woman in the grip of a genuine psychological crisis, a crisis produced entirely by the man who was her victim. He called expert witnesses to explain battered woman syndrome to the jury in clinical terms, stating that what Therese was in was a form of temporary insanity, otherwise known as battered woman syndrome, leaving her delusional at the time of the crime. And he argued that because she was in a moment of psychosis or delusion when she acted, she should be found not guilty. And his argument was successful. In the end, the jury agreed that Therese Rogers murdered her boyfriend because she had become convinced that the past 9 years of horrible treatment was going to lead to either her or her daughter's death, or both. The jury agreed that because of the state of mind that Therese Rogers was in, she was convinced that Walter Quinn was capable of killing her at any moment, so she murdered him before he could murder her. Therese Rogers was acquitted in 1989, found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. It was the first successful use of the battered woman syndrome defense in Massachusetts history, and again, it was the case that earned Reddington a spot in the American College of Trial Lawyers, something that is reserved for less than 1% of trial lawyers across the US, Canada, and Great Britain. Pretty wild. Today, Kevin Reddington is obviously representing Lindsay Clancy. He's 75 years old now, and he has more than 100 murder cases behind him. That said, I think it's pretty obvious that he is insanely good at what he does, but it is also worth noting that in the past, he has represented criminals responsible for doing very, very, very horrible things, but part of the job, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I was just doing some research, came across this case, and I thought I would tell you guys about it. That's all for me today. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.